debate, research, study going into the verifiable facts involving the shape and motion of the world we live on. There's also a lot of nonsensical argument, which is just enacting the programming, really. The programming we've all been trained to execute since we were just gullible little kids. Even as a small, gullible kid, we all must be convinced or coerced into believing that our world is a spinning sphere, since it absolutely disagrees with all verifiable nature and all verifiable science. So people point to the programming as evidence, as if I or the other flat earthers talking about the topic have never been through the standard education on the globe model, or the standard education system in general. Operation Make Everyone Dumb as... I was extremely inquisitive as a child, much to my parents' aggravation and dismay, I can assure you. I had learned everything the school system tried to teach me as a young adult when I was just a very small child. I was reading books by the time I was 4, and my dad would have explained the globe model to me at least a year or two before kindergarten. My dad was very much a big fan of NASA and the moon landings, and so I, of course, was very much a big fan of NASA and the moon landings too. That's sort of how it goes, right? If your dad is a Democrat or a big fan of NASA, then odds are you're going to be a Democrat or a big fan of NASA. Same thing goes for Republicans. So we tend to follow the same affinities as our parents, and at least and especially when we're really small children, as our parents are typically the guiding and educational force in our life if they're doing anything right. So why? That was always the question. My parents tell me I was always asking why, and I do tend to remember being extremely curious about things, and even to this day I have always found the need to understand things empirically, explicitly, and under no uncertain terms. I'm a brass tacks kind of guy. That's just how I've always been. So when my parents taught me as a very small child about the globe model, and they certainly, would have opened a can of worms on that one. I can imagine that conversation. Don't necessarily remember it because I was pretty small, but so of course I would be told the world is a globe.
What?
We live on a spinning globe hurling through space.
Why?
What do you mean, why?
Why do you say we live on a globe when the world is obviously flat and stationary?
Well, it seems to be flat and stationary, but the world is actually a spinning globe.
Why?
Because we can see the stars moving and the sun seems to move through the sky, but that's because we're spinning. They're not actually moving.
Why?
Well, I really don't know, but the scientists of NASA flew all the way to the moon and took this picture of the Earth. It's a sphere, see?
Why is it a sphere?
Because we're going to have moon bases and rocket ships for everyone when you grow up.
Why?
Well, because that's just what's going to happen. When I was a kid, we all expected to have moon bases and Mars bases by the 80s. But it's a lot harder to colonize space than we thought.
Why?
Well, because everything is so far away, and space is a vacuum, so it's really hard to travel through space and even send things to the moon, which is a lot closer than any of the stars you can see.
Why?
Well, because the stars are so far away, it literally takes light years to travel from one star to our eye.
Why?
Well, a star is nuclear fusion, which creates light. Even though light travels really fast, it'll take years, sometimes hundreds or even millions of years, for the light to reach your eye from that particular star.
Why?
Well, you see, the sun is a lot closer star, but all those other stars are just suns. But even the light from the sun takes a few minutes for the light to reach us.
How do you know?
Well, the sun is 93 million miles away, and if you figure the speed of light, it takes about 8 minutes for that light to get from the sun to your eye.
How do you know?
Well, a really smart guy named Albert Einstein proved that pure energy can be created simply by accelerating an object with the mass at the speed of light squared. which he proved with a simple of equations, E equals mc squared.
Well, what does that prove?
I don't know.
So how do you know we live on a globe again?
Well, you can see the moon and the sun are spheres, so we obviously live on a sphere too.
Why?
Well, it's been proved that we live on a sphere because of that picture from NASA.
Oh, okay. So why don't we just fall off the sphere? We live on the top?
No. You see, there's a force called gravity that pushes down on the face of the Earth, caused by the Earth warping space-time.
What's space-time?
I don't know really, but it's just what causes gravity.
Why?
Well, it's obviously true because we don't go flying off into space at over 1,000 miles per hour, now do we?
Why?
Well, you see, the Earth is spinning over 1,000 miles per hour near the equator.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Why?
Well, because we figured out that the circumference of the Earth is about 25,000 miles, and since it takes about 24 hours to rotate once, every hour an object fixed to the surface will have traveled over 1,000 miles near the equator.
So how fast do we go if we're not near the equator?
Well, it depends.
Why?
It depends because if you spin a sphere on an axis point, the equator or the middle of the sphere is inherently traveling a greater distance in a shorter time, so the further away you are from the center you get, the slower and slower you're spinning.
Oh, okay. So how do you know we live on a sphere again?
Just look at the picture. I mean, that's where you live, and it's been proved. When you grow up, they'll have flying cars and rockets so that all the little infernally inquisitive little such as yourself will be able to look at all the other planets and see if we can find any other people on them. Maybe not in our own solar system, but perhaps on one of those other stars.
Oh, so if it takes 1,000,000 years to reach my eye from that star for light, then how long would it take for me to get there?
Well, that depends.
Why?
Oh, never mind. Just go play Nintendo.
Wow, I meant to nail all of them. Right, guys.
So, I'm pretty well versed in the conventional accepted model of our world since long before it was ever taught to me in a science class. So indeed, by the time the globe model was shoved down my throat in school, I was already sort of an expert on the subject. When my science teacher told me that our weight was caused by a column of air pushing down on me with whatever I happened to weigh on the scale, I asked my teacher, but
What about gravity? Isn't that also pushing down upon me too?
so I was told it was a stupid question, and the air was pushing down on me because of gravity. And I just said,
Oh, okay.
as if that answered the question. The globe model has now been irrefutably disproved with all of the verifiable evidence we can observe and scrutinize. Not one single bit of evidence supports the globe model, and all of the verifiable evidence proves that our world is definitely flat, definitely stationary, and the celestial bodies orbit the magnetic center, which is fixed upon our North Pole. It's simply impossible for anyone who has been indoctrinated into the programming to imagine our world as anything but a globe spinning around the sun. So until just a few months ago, you could have included me in that category along with everyone else. The difference between myself and an average person is the fact that I simply was compelled to look at the evidence, and really just for shits and giggles, certainly to disprove the flat earth and not to seriously entertain the idea. I thought I was bringing skeptical criticism to the topic, but instead I only brought falsehoods and programming which was literally drilled into my mind when I was about 4 years old. I've gone along with the conventional model ever since, and I still would to this day had it not been for sheer chance and the help of some of the flat earthers like Eric DeBay, Matt Boyland, Jeranism, Yoda's Conspiracy Channel, Stars or Souls, and many, many others. I couldn't even begin to name them. The average person doesn't understand how the entire world could be lying about the very shape of our world. The thing is, you're technically not lying if you believe you're telling the truth. So by definition, all the scientists of the world are gullible children who've been misled their entire life and have simply never been compelled to scrutinize the globe model with any degree of skepticism. With all due respect, this is totally anti-scientific. However, no rational person has any incentive or stimulus to start questioning the globe model. Indeed, they would have their head examined first and would be laughed off the stage by all the other gullible children of scientists. In truth, most fields of science are simply misled into believing the globe model, and much of the evidence which proves the flat earth model can sort of be skewed and twisted to prove the globe model. All scientists in this world have been indoctrinated in the same system which we have, and have delved way deeper into the Psy Op, the major Psy Op, the mother of all psy-ops, which is extremely potent and inescapable without a jolt or an outside stimuli to direct the observer towards one known truth that's been drilled into their mind permanently since they were just a little kid. Without Morpheus pulling Neo out of the Matrix, he never would have stood a chance and probably would have made a stupid movie. Agreed? Watching Keanu Reeves poop into a tube whilst bathing in a vat of pink goo for 2.5 hours wouldn't have been a lot of fun, to be sure. So, as an adult, fully indoctrinated into the belief of a globe, I would often find myself marveling at the balancing act of gravity, an imaginary force that was dreamed up to account for the fact that we're not somehow flung from the globe as it spins over 1,000 miles per hour near the equator. I could never wrap my brain around the idea of gravity somehow forming a planet out of dust, with all the bits of sun dust coalescing into a solid body that somehow begins to spin at some point, and somehow balances out this outward thrust generated by spin with the inward thrust of gravity. I couldn't understand how this merging from not spinning bunch of small dust and rocks, and at what point does it start spinning, and at what point does gravity take over the massive spinning system? When it wasn't spinning? Was gravity affecting the surface of the world more than when it was spinning? So this balancing act would simply be impossible in my mind to wrap my head around without gravity and the spinning force being in perfect coordination. But which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? So the mass with gravity or the spinning mass. So I never could wrap my brain around it, but what a mysterious and awesome world to be so well balanced. Physics says the laws of rotational motion will cause objects connected to the surface of a spinning object. They will experience outward thrust. So if we all indeed lived on a globe that was spinning that fast, then we'd need to have something holding us stuck to the face of the earth. Now, quote, gravity is supposedly that force, but we simply cannot feel the effects of gravity since it is so weak. So weak that it doesn't affect small bodies such as ourselves, but strong enough to hold yourself and all the oceans of the world stuck to the sides of the globe as it spins over 1,000 miles per hour towards the east near the equator. So to be very honest with you folks, the globe model is so very laughable and preposterous, it's really quite amazing that they actually tricked the entire world into believing it. By the time the moon landings occurred, our society was ripe for the deception, to be very honest. The propaganda machine of our government was targeting the masses with the infinite space model, which spawned all sorts of shows and movies and documentaries and books around the premise of space being infinite with billions and billions of galaxies and possibly aliens and space travel long before the Apollo missions were even on the drawing board. Indeed, if you ask a person who was around during the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, they'll tell you that theoretical physics predicted flying cars, moon bases, and all sorts of really wild things by the time, the 21st century rolled around 15 years ago. In truth, we have about the same world we had then. Not much has changed, to be frank. People can accomplish some remarkable things, but only if we're allowed to flourish. And we simply cannot flourish under the amount of control that we're under with the globe model, which is false and is designed to imprison our minds. We cannot accomplish the impossible at any rate. That's inherently, impossible. So I've made several videos documenting all sorts of proof that shows our world couldn't possibly be a globe. One of the most outspoken and logical flat earthers I've really enjoyed watching his stuff is Jeranism. Put a link in the descripts. A few days ago, we got the solid evidence that we need to prove that the astronomers of the world, that they have all had their heads shoved so far up their asses that little lump in their throat is their nose. Consider this major fallacy in the globe model, which proves beyond the shadow of any doubt that the globe model couldn't possibly produce the observable reality that we can measure and scrutinize as scientists. No, you do not need a degree in science to be a scientist. All you need to do is follow the scientific method and follow the facts wherever they lead you. That makes you a scientist. Okay. So if you look at the picture here, you'll see that the Earth travels around the Sun in an elliptical orbit in the globe Earth model. Now keep in mind, I'm humoring the conventional accepted model for scientific scrutiny. I would really appreciate it if some of the scientific globe Earthers out there would apply some of the same hallmark scrutiny towards the globe model as well as the flat Earth model. Right, so let's say this is summer and this is spring, okay? So it's daytime in the globe Earth model is whenever your side of the planet is facing the sun, right? Okay, so one thing that's inescapable is the fact that we can only view and study the stars at nighttime and not during the day, agreed? Because during the day, the sun is in between the stars that are behind the sun and your eye. Okay, so depending on summer or spring, day is totally arbitrary in terms of direction, and is always pointed towards the sun in daytime, always pointed away from the sun at nighttime. So when the sun is above you and it's day, and when the world spins away from the sun, then it's night. Agreed? Okay. So how does the modern astronomy explain the fact that we can see the same stars at night when we're talking about spring versus summer versus autumn versus fall? If you don't understand what I'm saying here, then I suggest you go to Jeranism's site. He's got a video that explains it probably a little bit better using conventional astronomy software. Suffice to say, if the sun is between the stars and your eye, you can't see the stars that are behind the sun because it's daytime. So the stars that were above your head in the winter will be directly behind the sun for the entire summer, meaning you could never possibly see those stars that you can see overhead during the winter would be behind the sun in the summer. Unfortunately for the globe model, this one single fact alone proves that the conventional accepted model of our world is dead wrong. We can add this to the list of irrefutable, undeniable, never-ending pile of proof that shows our world could not possibly be a spinning globe. You see, that's how the truth works. A lie can go on for so long with lie after lie after lie to perpetuate it, but once the truth is revealed, the truth makes sense under every ounce of scrutiny, and the lie becomes more laughable with every bit of evidence that is scrutinized. All of the evidence proves the Earth is flat and stationary. I'll just give a couple here since this is a flat Earth video, but number one, buildings from 50 miles away plus a building over 50 miles away should be a quarter mile below the horizon and should also be angled away from your perspective. We can see perfectly vertical, perpendicular to the horizon, buildings from over 50 miles away. This alone also proves that the world couldn't possibly be a globe. The North Star Polaris, this is number two. The North Star Polaris remains fixed in alignment with our North Pole, which is supposedly wobbling, and we're supposedly spinning around the sun, spinning around the galactic center, and hurling through space, and yet somehow, by some miracle of science, the North Star remains fixed in alignment with our measly, arbitrary, wobbly North Pole. All the world's oceans, number three. All the world's oceans are basically still, other than the waves caused by the sheer mass of the unimaginably large body of water known as the different divided oceans of the world. It's all just one big, huge body of water, but how is it possible on a spinning globe that all of the waters of the world are basically still? If the globe model were true, you would certainly expect to see constant, ceaseless, never-ending, giant, huge, enormous waves traveling over 1,000 miles per hour, always towards the west, across the surface of the water and slamming into the continents every few minutes. Number 4, scientific studies have been done. See IFRS, International Flat Earth Research Society boards, which involve firing cannons perfectly vertical into the air on a still day. The cannonball will often land directly into the barrel of the cannon that fired it. This is done under controlled conditions with multiple cannons on a clear day, and a plumb line was used to ensure the cannon was fired vertically. If you consider the laws of motion, such a cannonball should land many miles to the west of the cannon. People will argue that the cannonball was traveling in accordance with the Earth prior to the explosion compressed in the barrel of the cannon. However, when does the ball lose the momentum only lent to it by the Earth spinning 1,000 miles per hour towards the east? With all due respect, the laws of motion state that an object traveling will tend to maintain its velocity until enacted upon by some other force. But wouldn't an explosion compressed in the barrel of a cannon count as some other force? Yes, it would, for sure. So the ball in the cannon might continue traveling east in accordance with the spin of the Earth for some short duration after being fired. However, the cannon fixed to the ground, traveling its constant, never-ending, ceaseless spin of 1,000 miles per hour towards the east, the ground would carry the cannon along with it, but the ball itself should appear to head west in relation to the cannon. Slowly at first, but at an eventual maximum rate of 1,000 miles per hour, depending on how high you could fire it. Under no circumstances, ever, on a spinning globe, should the cannonball land anywhere near the cannon that fired it. Any artilleryman will tell you that they don't need to figure in the spin of the Earth when firing artillery. If you think about it, the artillery team were to fire a load towards the west on a globe and all the atmosphere spinning towards it to the east, it would be a rather stupid fucking thing to do now, wouldn't it? Sort of like pissing into the wind? Instead, we can fire artillery any old way we want because the Earth is flat and stationary. Even the spin of the Earth aside, with all due respect, the Earth is also supposedly beholden to the effects of the Sun traveling around the galactic center and the galaxy hurling through space a gazillion miles per hour. Projectiles fired into the air should be expected to do all sorts of wild maneuvers, since they are no longer beholden to and abiding by the spinning and traveling and rotating and flying through space Earth that doesn't do any of those things. Remember how weak gravity is and affects only large bodies? So what the fuck is causing the artillery ball and cannonballs to simply abide to all that motion, just as it would if it was attached to the Earth, which is attached to the spin of the Sun, which is attached to the galactic center, which is attached to flying through space? Too much motion never happened. So people say the flat earthers are the weirdest, stupidest, and most gullible or most deceptive people in the world, since that's what everyone's programmed to think. If you study the topic with any amount of scrutiny and discernment, and direct some of that healthy, necessary, long overdue, abundantly critical skepticism you scientific types are so famous for, then I suggest you direct it towards the spinning globe, which only exists in your mind, but we certainly do not dwell upon. Every bit of logically sound and verifiable evidence proves beyond the shadow of any doubt that the world is definitely not spinning and is also flat and stationary. The scientific types of the world are totally lost and misled, and the people are calling us liars. Check out my other Flat Earth videos, along with some of the other YouTube channels I mentioned earlier, if you want to know the truth. For some of you existing Flat Earthers out there, here's something to think about my wife and I were discussing today. So, talking about the DUMBs, the deep underground military bases, if that's true, which, it is true, it's not debated, it's just the extent to which the DUMBs are connected with underground tunneling is debated. But let's just say for a minute that it's mostly true, and we have machines that can drill some ridiculous feet per day in terms of giant tunnels under the ground. It's possible that the infrastructure to explore beyond the outer wall already exists right under our feet. It's high time we use the Freedom of Information Act and other such constitutionally based rights while we've still got them to uncover what these Luciferian Freemasons have been hiding under our noses and under our feet all this time. My grandfather was high up in the U.S. Army and the government in the Pentagon for over 50 years. Did you know that even he was totally unaware of some of the things that he happened to stumble upon in Virginia in a hotel? He used to visit all the time. He had no idea it was actually one of those secret entrances to a dome. And he had clearance and privileges galore and was totally oblivious. So, to me, I don't think it's aliens being hid under there. I think that's a crazy cover story to, get people away from the topic and add just all this crazy mystique to it. But is it possible that they've been spending all that money on drilling beneath the seabed beyond the Antarctic? I'm not just, stating this as plausible, but if you really think about it and you understand the technologies that they have, and if you assume that they've had this knowledge, which they do, isn't that what you'd be doing? So wouldn't it be easier and less noticed if they drilled such tunnels all the way beyond the Antarctic wall? They'd probably, have done some recon first, for sure. Spy planes can travel extreme distances, so it's certain that if we lived on an infinite plane, and I absolutely don't subscribe to the enclosed system, although there's always a chance that it is an enclosed system, okay? But let's just say it's an infinite plane and there is more land out there, then it's a sure thing that they've scouted and mapped and figured out the best way to go to find the closest neighbor or the closest, quote, solar system, and all that on the possibly infinite plane covered in a thick sheet of ice. Our home and, the true place which we dwell, not a spinning globe, but just simply a puddle carved into the thick sheet of ice by the sun, orbiting the magnetic center, a calm, stationary, peaceful place with all sorts of wonder and hope for the future, not some spinning speck of dust hurling around the sun in the infinite darkness of space. No, it's not any of that. Our world is the place to be. It's the only seat in the house. Sure, we can see all sorts of spheres traveling around the center, which is fixed upon our stationary North Pole. Some of these things even fall to the ground in the form of, quote, meteorites. Since we know the globe model is wrong, and therefore the entire model of the solar system is indeed wrong, then you might want to heed those warnings hearkening back to the Bible about the sky falling. In the globe model, such a thing would be preposterous and could only amount to a misunderstanding of a meteor shower. But could you imagine if the force that causes all the celestial bodies to orbit the center suddenly ceased to function? If we don't break this mind control program that has been so wickedly forced upon our entire species, we're going to allow the wildly misinformed population to go hurling over a cliff. The globe model is so asinine and illogical, and every bit of physical evidence we can verify proves it as such. But, unfortunately, there are a lot of shills on this topic. In truth, the shills post comments on the topic more than the proponents and the people questioning the subject rationally combined. This is a huge big deal to the people trying to cover it up. This is the number one control factor in our world, and if we can bring this to the public discussion, we can literally beat the Great Deception predicted for 2,000 years or so.
Smoke on top of my lungs. I wasn't even tapping my mum. Trapped and alone. Over the lust for the fun. With no trust for your son. Thinking, where has he gone and what has he done?